Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Crosswhite, and thanks for joining us for a special edition of KSN Local News at 6. We've teamed up with the Alliance of Southwest Missouri to help them present their Addiction Crisis Town Hall meeting. Really quickly, I want to introduce you to my co-host for this evening, RT from Star 104.3. RT, I know this subject matter is something that really hits home for you.
Yeah, I'm a recovering addict as well. I've been clean for about 22 years. People don't know that about me. If you think about it, they just think, ooh, that's the crazy guy from the radio. Yeah, I struggled as well. So I've been in the same place as a lot of the people in the room. I've had those addictions. I've self-medicated for a long time. I was homeless. And it really means a lot that people are getting together and doing something like this to help those that, really need the help.
Well, we're glad to have you with us tonight. And of course, everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different.
Yes.
And everybody is going to sort of vary on what their addictions are and what they're more likely to follow into. But I think the point of tonight is really to get the word out, get people thinking about addiction, get people asking questions and have it on their mind, and sort of the signs to look for with people, especially young people, when they start to go down that wrong path. And then when you get to that point, what do you do? Once you realize the signs are there, what action do you take to get them on the right path? And you know as well as anybody that it's easier said than done.
Yeah, the disease is real. It really is a disease. And the problem is finding the help you need and not being afraid of the help. And as parents, trying to identify exactly what caused the kids to get there or caused the people to get there, and then helping them find help. A lot of times when you're under the influence and addicted, you really don't want to look for help. And sometimes you need those people to love you and to show you the way. And that's kind of what this is about.
That's right. And this evening just shows that there is help out there available and people that care. We're going to be throwing a lot of information your way over the next couple of hours. We've got a whole panel of experts here tonight from different backgrounds, different career paths, different fields, to sort of give us a little bit of insight into the world of addiction. These are people that deal with drug abuse and drug addiction on a regular basis. And what's cool about that is a lot of our questions for the panel is going to come from you, our viewers at home. A quick reminder that you can go to our KSN Local News Facebook page, and there you'll see a section on there where you can comment, give us questions, and they're going to relay those back to us so that we can ask our panel here tonight. We've also got some great interviews set up, some people who have had their lives personally impacted by drug abuse. It could be anything from someone who's lost a family member to those people that, like you, are on the right path now.
Right.
But let's hand it over now to Aaron Gooch. He's been in law enforcement for 15 years, and he's currently a school resource officer for the Joplin Police Department. Aaron also serves as president of the Joplin Area Coalition. Aaron, I'll give it over to you now.
Thank you. I want to start off just thanking the area coalitions for getting this event going. It's important that we all talk about it. And specifically, I want to mention a couple people that are involved in the coalition that I know don't get enough recognition, and that's the members of SAD from the high school here. They come to these meetings with a bunch of old people that talk and act like they know everything, and they speak up and they make their voice heard, and they really drive the coalition, and that's pretty important. So I wanted to recognize them for sure. I'm going to start off. I know we've all seen these posters. This one's Kelsey, but there's others with similar stories. And mention one thing about these posters that I think is pretty important. Any of us that would look at the individuals on this poster would not identify these as being at-risk people or what we think of being at-risk people. They were making good grades. They're from strong, supportive families. They're involved in activities. They're doing everything that we would hope they would do to avoid struggling with addiction. And they still ended up, for whatever reason, doing that. So these posters, to me, challenge kind of what we may have thought in the past. And they kind of tell me that we're all kind of at risk. And it's important that we educate and are engaged and talk about this stuff. And these posters help drive that conversation. So I want to make that point about these. When you see these posters and you see these people on these posters, know that this is a problem that can affect any of us, any of our families, and events like this are important, so I thank everybody for coming here. I started off, when they told me I had 10 minutes to talk about drug recognition, I kind of panicked, because there's so much information, it's impossible to, this is what this drug is, this is what it does. So I wanted to kind of hit on some of the stuff that all these things have in common. And one of those things is kind of the behavior stuff. And a lot of this is going to be stuff we've heard before, but It's important, especially for early intervention. So we'll go through some of these, and another thing they have in common is the equipment, the paraphernalia, the things that an individual might use to transport or prepare or use whatever substance they're using. So that's what we're going to look at. And then when the event's over, we'll have a table set up where we can get more into specific information. You can see examples and up close of what some of this stuff is and what it does. But we'll start off with the behavior stuff. The first thing for early intervention that I wanted to mention is how this stuff, especially for youth, affects daily habits, including things like sleeping and eating. So if somebody's starting with an addiction, you might notice, depending on the substance that they're using, that they're sleeping a lot more or a lot less, or eating a lot more or a lot less. So paying attention to those things would be a good indicator that somebody might be starting or building into a substance abuse problem. Another one is emotionally withdrawn and secretive. And emotionally withdrawn is kind of tricky because we all know that, especially for youth, that's kind of just part of growing up. But when that withdrawn turns into being secretive or prohibiting parents from going into bedrooms and like they're hiding something, that can also be a red flag or something that we need to pay attention to. Decline in school performance. Again, the pollsters that we look at challenge that, but it's hard for somebody struggling with substance abuse for it not to affect their performance at school, whether that's grades dropping or quitting activities, that kind of thing, is an important thing to look for. Hanging out with a different group of friends. As people start using these substances, maybe their old friends are not involved in that, so we start hanging around with new friends that are. So changes in groups of friends would also be a red flag that there might be a problem. Missing money and valuables. As people become involved in substance abuse, and it gets harder to obtain more of whatever substance it is they need to keep using to stay out of withdrawals or just to feel normal. We might see money come up missing, valuables. That could be things like jewelry, could be electronics, even medications turn up missing, things that they could sell or trade to get more of the drug that they need. Involved in legal troubles. So little things like being cited for theft or trespassing or getting charges for possessing drugs or possessing drug paraphernalia also be a good indicator that there might be a problem. And then finding drugs and paraphernalia among that seems obvious. Again, I don't have time to show pictures of every drug, but drug equipment's a big thing that often gets left behind, and eventually, and somebody that they didn't want to see it sees it. Knowing what that stuff is, knowing what it does, what it's for, is all pretty important. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start talking about what some of those things are. And again, we're going to stick to kind of the general things that we might see that cover a lot of different drugs. The first is pipes and bongs. The ones on the screen now are ones we generally think of people involved with smoking marijuana. These could be made of a lot of different materials, different colors. They can be pretty basic, very elaborate, even oftentimes homemade. There's also different types of pipe associated with people smoking what we would consider harder drugs. These would be like a glass tube or a glass tube with a bulb at the end. Most often these will have residue of the drug and charred or burn marks on one end of it. Good indicator of drug use. Burnt aluminum foil, especially if they have these kind of patterns in them, also used to smoke different kinds of drugs. Aluminum foil also is one of the things that people might store a drug in or transport a drug in. Scales, we talk about digital scales, handheld scales, similar to like a postal scale. Digital scales, again, they can be pretty obvious or they can be more discreet, disguised as things like smartphones. Also a good indicator. Most drugs that we find, whether it's marijuana or pills or powders, are transported, stored in these baggies. It could be a sandwich bag, even smaller. Often they're clear. They can be colored. They can even have designs on them. And then capsules like you'd find at, the store. These are a lot of times we find people are storing their drugs in these, transporting their drugs in these. Cards and straws. Again, if somebody has progressed to the point that they're snorting a drug, whether it's a powder or a pill that they've smashed up, these things are pretty common. Shortcut straws, drinking straws, or parts of ink pens. Also, a good indicator that there's a problem. Needles and spoons, or even the caps to the needles. A lot of times these spoons will have residue in them and be burned on one side. A lot of times things like this are found in a kit that might include some kind of tourniquet, a belt or a lace or a rubber band or tube, cotton balls, that kind of stuff. Again, that's a lot of information kind of fast, and I can't give enough in the time that I have in the 10 minutes. Please check out the table outside. We'll have examples of all these things that you can look at up close. And if you find any of these things, please don't rationalize it. Take action, address it, because these are all good indicators that somebody's struggling with addiction.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Let's give him a round of applause. And as we bring all of our interviews up really quickly, I do want to remind everybody at home that you can go to our KSN Local News Facebook page and submit any questions, anything in the world of drug abuse, drug addiction that you would like answered. Post those questions on there, and they're going to get those to us so we can ask our panel. Speaking of, we're going to be passing around a basket to our audience members. I believe all of you were given cards, or will be given cards here shortly, of any questions that you would like to have answered by our panel today. First up for our interviews, I'm going to bring on Stacy Krokowski. Stacy, come on up. Stacy, thank you for being here. A little bit about Stacy. She's the sales manager for KOAM and Fox. She and her husband, James, reside in Baxter Springs, Kansas. Their son, Jordan, who passed away in 2012, is featured in the addiction poster and billboard campaign that Aaron was talking about. Stacy and James have 3 remaining children, Colton, Braden, and Kennedy. Stacy, tell us a little bit about Jordan and the kind of person he was.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind about Jordan was his smile. I think everybody just loved his smile. He had an infectious, big, toothy grin. And everyone, when everyone talks about him, they talk about his smile, I think, the most. He loved people. He loved his family. He loved his friends and loved spending time with them. He loved people in general, too. He would help someone standing on a street corner just as much as he would help his best friend. So.
At what age did you start to realize that there was a problem and that possibly Jordan had an addiction?
We realized there was a major problem the 3rd semester of college.
And what were some of those indicators that really tipped you off?
Looking back, there was probably several indicators before that. But the main indicator at that point was his girlfriend had told us some issues he was having during that time.
Looking back now, can you pinpoint a source or identify a time or something that maybe happened to Jordan where you started to notice a turn?
Well, his first introduction to pain pills was wisdom teeth. He had his wisdom teeth taken out, and he had several rounds of dry sockets, and so he had been on pain pills during those times. And then several sports injuries, and this was during high school. And after he was deeper into his addiction, he told me about those times later when he'd kind of come clean and had been reaching out for help. But it was during the first week of college that he tore his labrum, and he really didn't tell anyone, and he practiced all through the first semester of college with a torn labrum. And during that time, he was taking 6 to 8 pain pills a day, or during practice, to get through practice. And it was not until Super Bowl Sunday that following semester that his girlfriend told his dad and I that his shoulder wasn't right. And so at that time, we kind of stepped in and talked to the coach and scheduled doctor's appointment, and the surgery was scheduled after that.
When you started to notice that there were signs of addiction, what sort of avenues did you pursue to get Jordan help?
We tried to get him in to see, well, we tried several things. He went to Teen Challenge. He was not court appointed, so he left. He went to the Ozark Center for counseling. He never went to an inpatient facility. To be honest with you, to tell you the truth, a lot of we never saw him where we thought there was a major problem. We didn't see him like, with somebody with an alcoholic addiction to alcohol, you see somebody that's drunk, or other drugs. I mean, I was very ignorant.
It was hard to tell when the Jordan was actually using these.
Yes, we drug tested him quite frequently. And many times he would fail a drug test, and we would threaten to, but unless they want help, there's not really, you can threaten to kick him out, he moves out, then you don't know where he's at. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. When he finally was ready to get help, and he made the decision on his own, he went to Celebrate Recovery, and that was the best thing for him.
As a mother, do you have any advice for parents out there who maybe have questions or maybe starting to notice some of those traits that you did with Jordan? Any sort of advice for parents of teens out there?
To tell you the truth, I don't know what advice I would give. I mean, if I had to do it over, I don't know what I would change. I mean, I would like to think I would recognize it sooner, but I don't know if I would or not. If it hadn't happened to us and I was at home watching this on TV, I would probably be one of those viewers saying, man, I feel really bad for those parents. But I'm glad it's not my kid. I'm glad that's not the truth that we live here in my home, because sometimes the truth is better left. I mean, sometimes the truth is just really too much to bear. And sometimes you don't really want to think about the truth in your own home. And you don't want to face it. And I know that there was a lot of times I didn't want to face it and would rather just, I'll deal with it later. I just didn't think it would kill him. I didn't see a kid that was different than anybody else. So he still functioned. He had the best personality in the world, so,
It could be difficult.
It was
especially
difficult.
for a mother to see their child in that light.
So as a parent, I think, well, our truth is, he's just not that bad. And, I think that as a viewer, if I were sitting here watching this again, I would feel bad for these parents that are telling this story. But as I'm standing here talking about it and thinking, I am that parent that was sitting there watching TV and hearing this story. And now I'm the parent that's telling the story, and I'm on the other end of it. And I don't want another mom to have to bury their kid. I don't want another mom to be told, because our son laid there after he had died. We were out of town, and it wasn't until somebody reported that he was not answering his phone that we had someone go look for him. He was at our house, and so he had laid there for quite a while, and I'm told that I don't get to have an open casket at my son's funeral. Possibly, ended up we did get to, but, I had to worry about that. We shouldn't have to worry about as parents whether we get to have an open casket at our kid's funeral or not. We shouldn't be burying our children we shouldn't have to stand up and fight this fight right now, but we have to, and that's the truth that we're living in right now.
A difficult story to tell, but some good advice for parents out there. Stacy, I want to thank you for being brave enough to talk about it and for taking the time to speak about it with us today.
Thank you.
I'm sure it made a difference. Thank you,
Thanks.
Stacy. Jonathan, if you want to come up, and RT, I'll let you handle this one.
All right, Jonathan Overman, he's 22 years old and a project manager at Service Recycling at Joplin Waste Paper. He's been there for 2.5 years. And you are clean for 2.5 years now, is that correct?
Sir.
Absolutely fantastic. You have a baby and you have a wife and your life has changed, right?
And a baby on the way.
And a baby on the way. Yeah, you're never going to sleep again. Just tell me real quick, how did you get involved into drugs? What is your story as far as how did you go down this path?
I think for me it was just, I don't know, I think a lot of people experiment and try certain things and they never do go down the path I went down. And I guess I thought the same thing could happen with me, that I could just, I was curious, I was just trying to know what certain things were like. I never was making a decision saying I potentially could be a drug addict, I was just making a decision thinking that I was going to know what this is like.
Yeah, the recreational use.
Yeah, no bad intentions,
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and then what happened? I mean, how did you eventually fall down this rabbit hole of addiction? I mean, did it start one day, you just said, here I am, and you just kept getting worse and worse, or?
At one point, I was making decisions to use drugs and alcohol, and then at one point, I made a decision that that's exactly what I want to do. It wasn't just, if it happened, it became, this is what I want to do. It wasn't necessarily that I want to be like the homeless guy on the side of the road with a brown paper sack, but it was that's what I wanted to, that's how I wanted to spend my time. That was the friend group that I had decided, and that's what we enjoyed, and that's what we did.
Yeah, and what was your turning point as far as getting out of the addiction?
Well, there was kind of two turning points. One turning point, at one point, consequences would have probably been enough to stop me, and, I don't know, it wasn't just one day, but over a period of time, it turned into something that, even with consequences coming, knowing that, the law, school, and,
Yeah.
problems at home were coming, those consequences did not matter. I'm still going to continue to go down the path that I'm going. That's whenever I knew, and I think probably other people as well, knew that this was a serious problem. It wasn't just a phase or, the friends I was hanging out with, that's when it was serious.
As your bottom kept getting lower, you kept going down with your bottom, and
Yeah,
kept getting
there.
worse, didn't care about anything else.
Yeah, I just set a new standard,
Yeah, oh yeah,
going.
as low as you can get, that's exactly right. But you did come out of it, and that's the
I
good
did.
news. So how exactly did you get to that point where you decided that your life was more important, that your family was more important, and you decided to get help? Where'd you get help at?
Well, I got in a lot of trouble, and I had a lot of consequences that came my way. And friends and family were no longer able to cushion those consequences for me because I got in some pretty serious trouble. That being said, I think as soon as I got to really experience the pain and saw, where I was headed, I got to, take a step back and look at it for a minute. And I had to make some decisions, but that being said, there was a lot of times I made the same decision. It was only with, the proper help that I was actually able to, do something with it. The decision is so small.
Yeah.
So many people that, we're seeing on, on the screen made the right decision. They made the decision to quit doing what they're doing. Life's more important. That decision's made a lot, but it's there's more to it than that.
It's sticking with the decision that becomes an issue sometimes, too.
And the right help. I think a lot of people want to get somewhere, but they don't know exactly how to get there, and the people around them don't know exactly how to get them there either. You can help. There's just a certain path that you got to go down to be successful.
And you have to be ready for that help, too.
Absolutely.
Right, so when you finally became ready, you got your help, and your life's getting a lot better.
Yeah.
That's good. Now, how old's your baby?
I got a 4-year-old right
Okay.
now. I got a baby coming in about 4 months.
Wow.
4.5 months.
Go, congratulations. Keep going, you're doing great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Now I want to introduce you to Jennifer Cartwright. Jennifer, come on up. Jennifer has a unique perspective, one, because she is a recovering addict, but also a
Yes.
nurse. So you experience on a regular basis patients that are sort of going through what you went through. Jennifer, at what age did you start using drugs?
I was 15 when I first experimented with drugs. And then in high school, I would say that I was just a casual user. It was in college that it started to become more of, if we were going to go out, we were going to have something, marijuana or liquor or something to get the party going. But then when I was a sophomore in college, I had an appendectomy. And that's the first time I really was introduced to opiate painkillers. And I loved the way that they made me feel. And I know that it was probably a lie I told myself, but I felt like for the first time I could really be me. I had suffered from anxiety for most of my life, and I could walk into a room and talk and not be scared, and I didn't feel the anxiety that I normally had. So, and then when I was 26, after a long illness, my father committed suicide, and my life just spiraled into addiction. I had no coping skills, how to deal with the grief, and I got lost for a while.
Before you started using the painkillers, would you have ever imagined that that was something that you could become addicted to, opiates?
No. I had grown up in my mother is a nurse, and I'd grown up thinking that medicine was something that helped you and that it wasn't dangerous. And I found out that it's very dangerous.
A very common misconception, I'm
Yes.
sure. How long have you been in recovery?
For 17 years. The first 3 years that I was in recovery, I was in a methadone program. And so I count it as 14 years that I've been in true recovery with. So,
Congratulations. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
that you did. Tell me a little bit about the impact it had on your family when you became addicted. What sort of toll did it take? Because that's got to be tough.
well, it was devastating to the family. And it wasn't just myself. I have 2 siblings, and my mother lost all of us to addiction for a while. So it was devastating to all of my relationships, to the relationship with my husband. I was newly married when my addiction really kicked into high gear. My mother was also suffering grief, and all 3 of her children were lost in addiction. So it was really a devastating thing to our family.
And since you've seen the toll that it can have on a family, do you have any advice out there for parents, maybe with teens who might be headed down that road?
I would say that first and foremost, you need to talk to your children. It's never, addiction is very prevalent in our family. So I have a niece and a nephew, and we started talking to them very young about the risk of addiction and what can happen. And so I think that that's very important. I think it's also very important to model behavior that we want to see in our children, that for one person, having a crutch might be an okay thing. Say you come home from work and you say, oh, that was a stressful day, I'm going to have a drink. And you model that for your children, and then they feel like, well, that's okay. When I'm under stress, I can have a crutch to get me through. And that's fine for some people, but for someone with addiction, that is extremely dangerous.
Do you remember when you decided to get clean, and what was it about that moment that really made you decide and determine to get clean? How'd you go about it?
Well, luckily, I still had a support system. I don't know exactly how, because I had tried to push everyone that loved me away. And I still had a support system. I reached out to my mother and my husband, and I said, I need help. And luckily, they got me into a treatment program. And the first treatment program I went to wasn't successful. You know, I learned some really good tools in that, but I went out and started using again. And so then I found out about my brother, actually, my older brother had went into a methadone program. And so I also started a methadone program and found out that to me, that just kind of retarded my growth for a while, that I was in a 12-step program and I was going to counseling. I was my husband and I did marriage counseling, and my mother and I did family counseling. And I started learning some basic skills about how to deal with life on life's terms, which is sometimes very difficult. And so then after about 2.5 years on the methadone program, I tapered myself off and have been in 12-step recovery since then.
Congratulations. And you do have a unique perspective, one, because you're a nurse, two, because you're a recovering addict, but also you know firsthand what it's like to lose someone you love to addiction. I know your brother passed away just a few months ago. Has that given you any new insight or any new thoughts and a new attitude towards addiction?
Well, my heart goes out to other family members that have lost someone. My brother was a beautiful man with a very promising future, and it seems like I have a younger brother also, and we both found recovery about the same time, and we desperately tried to pull my brother into recovery. And we never know what somebody else's bottom is going to be, and his bottom was overdosing on methadone. And so it's just so sad that we do have to fight this battle and that we can't save everyone, even when we have all of the tools and the perspective. Somebody has to want recovery.
Right, Stacy said it herself too.
Yes.
You've got to want that for yourself. Any advice for somebody, maybe somebody's out there watching right now and they're saying, I need to do something with my life. I need to change the way that I do things. What are the best first steps in your opinion?
Just do that first step. Just reach out and say, I need help. If you have a support system, reach out and say, I want this. I know that it seems like a mountain that no one could climb when you're standing on that side of addiction. At that point, I couldn't ever imagine my life without drugs. And so until I had some sober time, until I had detoxed, I couldn't make those decisions. But I also think it's important for us as a society to make sure that's why this is such a wonderful thing, that people have those resources, and when somebody's ready, there's a bed available for them to get help then.
Oftentimes when we talk about addiction, we also hear the term 12 steps. How significant are those 12 steps?
Well, they were my salvation, so they are everything to me. That, along with lots of therapy and learning life skills, saved me. And now I have a wonderful life, and it's sometimes strange to look back and think of that's where I once was. So the 12 steps, it's a place where you can find salvation, at least for me.
A great story of hope, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate that.
Thank
and
you.
Like she said, there is help out there available.
And finally, we're going to bring up Stephanie Patterson. Stephanie Patterson is the author of the blog My Addiction to Addiction, which was inspired by her daughter's battle with opiate addiction. Her mission is to stop the silence and educate the families about the signs, and she feels she missed as a parent. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Now, on your blog, you seem to focus a lot on locking up medications, and you also mentioned the fact that, talking about those consequences of not locking up your medication. Can we talk about that? What are the consequences that you're talking about?
Well, for example, I don't think anybody thinks that they'll ever be in this position. I know I didn't. And at a time in my life, I became really sick, and I was actually grieving because I had lost my stepdad and my dad. And I was being given several different medications to try to fix the problems. And I wouldn't take them because it didn't work, and I would put them in a bag and stick them in my closet. And when it was too late and I realized my daughter had a major problem, I went into my closet, and that bag of pain pills, sleeping pills, benzos, muscle relaxers, things of that nature were all gone. And that was, I didn't even know when they disappeared. I didn't know who took them. I had no idea because I wasn't monitoring them, and I didn't lock them up because I had no idea that was a problem or that's something that kids did.
Right. You think those things are safe because they come from a doctor and nobody's going to care about them, and
Exactly, and I think it was Stacy that mentioned wisdom teeth.
Right.
And both of my kids got their wisdom teeth out on the same day, and both of them got prescribed 30 oxycodones, and one took every pill she had for it, and one took none. And so I think it's really important that when doctors do give medication, that we as parents monitor it and don't just hand it over to them, because too many times they're going to take it if it's there. And I think it should be a last resort instead of a first resort, because they're too addictive. And when you're so vulnerable as a teen, there's too many pressures anyway, and they need to learn to deal with life rather than taking that edge off.
Right.
I think we're not preparing our kids for life and life's problems.
right, yeah, and you think that it's not going to hurt me, I'm going to be fine, like we had talked about before. Nobody ever plans on, I'm going to be an addict today. You just think it's
No.
okay and everything's all right.
Right. And
Yeah.
nobody thinks their kid's going to be an addict.
Right.
I never in a million years thought that mine would.
Right. Now, what would you do differently if you could go back?
Well, as far as the medications, definitely I would encourage everybody at home to lock up their medications and keep track of them, and do not hand them over if they are prescribed. My son had knee surgery from a college football injury, and they gave him some in the hospital, and he never took another one. So it's possible to live off of over-the-counter medications when you're hurt. But another thing I learned as a parent the hard way, I think as parents, we want to prevent our kids from suffering consequence, whether it's public humiliation of them going through legal problems, or if they get a minor in possession, or they anything, even as minor as, speeding tickets when they start being reckless. I think it's embarrassing to see your kid's name in the Joplin Globe, but as a parent, if I could go back, I would have not taken care of those things for her. I would have made her suffer those consequences, because the consequences become so much greater as you get older. And I think with parents, we need to realize is that whether people want to step back and say, it can't be my kid, or it can be absolutely anybody's child in any town, and therefore, we shouldn't all feel that it's a humiliating experience for them to suffer consequences. It's a part of growing up.
Yeah, learning experience is good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
How important is it to lock up medication? How much can we stress the importance of locking things up?
I did a survey on my blog, and it was 100 people, students answered it, and I believe it was 93% said their parents do not lock up their meds, and around that same percentage all said they had abused medicines in their own home.
Oh, wow.
And so, not only to protect your kids, but to protect everybody that comes into your house, because you don't know if somebody else's kid has gotten hooked on pain pills by getting their wisdom teeth pulled, and if they're coming into your home, keep everybody safe. It's just, it's better to be responsible about it, and then if there is a problem arising, you're aware that they've taken 23 hydrocodones. If you're dispensing it to them, just pay attention. Pay attention and lock it up, and don't give them the opportunity to abuse it.
Just be diligent in what you're doing and
Yes,
stuff. yeah.
absolutely, because it can happen to your child.
Absolutely. And if the prescription is written to the child, same rules apply. Make
Oh,
sure you're counting.
No, yeah, do not hand it over. Monitor it strictly, and just don't assume they need it. I mean,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes we, in this generation, we aren't used to living with pain, are we? We tend to
No.
overcompensate with some of those things, so.
Way too much. It's gotten to the point where we were talking to some kids today who were out of school, and as we were setting up today, and the girls were telling us different medications they were put on, and Kevin Thielen and I with the Alliance were talking to him, and we said, that's part of life. You have to, sometimes you're going to be sad, sometimes you're going to have problems, sometimes things are going to arise that aren't fun, but that's part of life, and not everything can be fixed with a pill.
Yeah, exactly. Can they get more information on your blog? What exactly is your blog and how do they get to it?
My blog is called My Addiction to Addiction.
Yeah.
It is linked to a Facebook page, which I try to share different information about resources where you can get help, and just different articles of other people that have gone through this battle, and all the families. We have several families on the front row who've lost their kids or that are in recovery that have been kind enough to put their faces in the public to try to save their lives. And so those stories are on there, and it's just a way to try to, honestly, probably 8 months ago, I thought I would be one of the parents standing here. I thought my daughter was going to be dead. And so it's just very important to me for people to be educated and learn the signs, and to know how to step in when there is a problem, and we all work together to try to start saving lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your story. We really appreciate it. And again, your blog, My Addiction to Addiction.
My Addiction to Addiction.
We strongly suggest go read it. It's very good reading.
Thank you.
And I don't
Thank
read
you.
well, so you're doing great. Thank you so much.
A lot of different messages to take away from that.
Yeah.
But once again, thank you to our speakers. It takes a lot of courage to get up and talk about some really sensitive issues.
Absolutely,
Sure.
yeah.
And a quick reminder, too, don't forget you can go to our KSN Local News Facebook page to suggest any questions, anything that you would like answered in the realm of drug addiction, drug abuse. We've got a whole panel of experts here to answer those questions, and we'd like to hear from you. That's on our Facebook page, KSN Local News. Speaking of, it's time to introduce our panel. And as I'm going to go right down the row, as you guys, I say your name, I apologize if I butcher it. If you just want to raise your hand, nod your head, whatever you want to do. First up, we have Jacob Scobie, who is the prosecuting attorney in Newton County. Down the line, William Lynch. Will is an assistant prosecuting attorney for Jasper County. He served in Jasper County for 3 years as a full-time prosecuting attorney, handling drug cases, DWIs, and domestic assaults. On down the line, Judge LePage, the Honorable John R. LePage, is the Associate Court Judge for the 40th Judicial Circuit, serving Newton and McDonald counties. We also have Judge Crane, the Honorable Gail Crane, currently serves as Division I Circuit Court Judge for the 29th Circuit Court in Jasper County. Prior to being elected judge in 2006, she was a partner in a law office which she practiced family, criminal, and general law. Also, Judge Hensley, the Honorable Joseph Hensley, is Associate Circuit Court Judge for Division 5 in Jasper County. Prior to being elected Associate Judge, he was in private practice specializing in juvenile law. Also, we have Alyssa Hendricks, and Alyssa is the Drug Court Administrator for the 40th Judicial Circuit, serving Newton and McDonald counties. Also, Dana Sanders has served as Chief Juvenile Officer for the 29th Circuit in Jasper County since October of 2000. Also served as Reserve Police Officer with the Joplin Police Department, a board member for Children's Center, and is the past board president of the Missouri Police Juvenile Officers Association. Moving on down the line, Marty Yost. Marty has served as Chief Juvenile Officer for the 40th Circuit, serving Newton and McDonald counties. And Dr. Taman Page. Dr. Page is a board-certified psychiatrist who grew up in Joplin and returned home to battle mental illness. He's the department chair of the Behavioral Health Department at Mercy Joplin. Also, Jennifer Cartwright, who we heard from earlier. Jennifer is the owner and phlebotomist at Lab Health Network in Carthage, Missouri. She has a reputation for putting patients at ease so they don't notice she's drawing their blood. As a nurse since 1997, Jennifer has professional experience with drug-addicted patients. Also, Jackie Kell is a PLTC with Preferred Family Healthcare in Joplin. She's going on her second year with PFH. I think I got everybody. Did I get everybody? Thank you all, panelists, for being here. You guys ready for your first question? The first question we have here is one that somebody submitted online, and it looks like it's more for the treatment or medical field. It says, my daughter's addiction spiraled out of control while she was on Suboxone. How is this type of treatment regulated, and what should addicts know before choosing medication-assisted treatments? Anybody want to take that one? There are mics on your table.
You're up, yeah.
You're the guy.
I'm going to say this up front. I'm an adult psychiatrist. I tend to be very opinionated, so you're going to get my opinion with this. I am not a fan of Suboxone or Methadone. I think the vast majority of people, it's not a good idea. Complete abstinence, in my opinion, should always be the goal. 12-step meetings focus on complete abstinence. Now, in some people, Suboxone, Methadone, those opiate replacements are okay on a temporary basis with the plan of tapering them off. And that's part of the largest problem with those opiate replacement programs, in my view, is that most people are kept on them too long. So I don't know if that kind of answers
I think that it
your
does.
question. So.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take that one or add to it?
Just that I agree with Dr. Page that I hate the methadone program, and my brother was on methadone for 17 years. They continue to increase his dose, and I feel like that is part of the reason that we lost him, because he really never had a chance to face the consequences that he should, and to have a clear mind to make real decisions. So.
Very good. Any other? Okay. Our next question is, what percentage of people get sentenced to prison that are committed crimes relating directly to drugs? Does anybody have an answer to that, or know the amount of people that are sent to prison strictly for a drug crime? Oh, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
In our county, we presently have 18% of DWI cases that are sentenced to prison, and 81% is on probation for drugs. What is that? 19% are sent to prison.
Wow.
And that's Jasper County.
That's Jasper.
Of the felonies that we see in McDonald County that I deal with, probably the vast majority are somehow related to drug or alcohol abuse. It may be a stealing charge,
Brought on by.
something like that, but the vast majority of them, if not physical assaults, possession, right on down the line.
Yeah, the things that go along with their addiction that cause them to do other crimes.
Right.
Correct, yeah. Is it about the same in the other counties?
I would imagine.
I guess my opinion on, you hear a lot about nonviolent drug offenders going to prison. They don't get sent to prison just for drug possession.
Right.
If somebody's going to prison for a drug offense, it's because they've been on probation or they've been in a treatment court and they're just not doing what they need to do to stay out of prison. But Judge LePage is correct. Burglaries, most burglars are getting money for drugs, or they're just stoned at the time and they make bad choices. So alcohol and drug addiction is weaved into about everything that we deal with. But in order to get sent to prison, it's going to have to be somebody who is, in this day and age, been given a chance at straightening themselves up.
Thank you.
Here's another question we had. If a family has no health insurance, are there treatments available by state grants or by funding? Is there help out there for people that don't have health insurance, who maybe can't pay for treatment themselves?
Go ahead.
There are some programs out there for those people that don't have health insurance, but the truth is they are few and far between. The ones that are available are usually overly expensive, and the few funding that certain facilities have is just limited. The money that they receive from state and federal grants or whatnot it's just so limited. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options. There are some out there. I think Ozark Center has some grant money that they use to fund their inpatient services, but it's hard. There's not a lot.
Yeah.
I know that through our treatment courts, and my understanding it's for anybody that walks off the street, that at Ozark Center, New Directions, they use a sliding fee scale And if you're on Medicaid, there's also treatment available through that.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you don't have money, 12-step meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, those are free, they're available, they're everywhere.
And they're every night.
What's that?
And you can find one just about every night.
Yep, you can find one about every night.
Yep.
And I know some of these resources on here are kind of halfway houses, those are options too. There are work programs where people will go and stay there long-term for a year and work to pay for the program. So there are options out there.
Very good. Anybody else? Thank you so much. Our next question. Once a person begins using drugs, what does it do to their brain? And then once they stop using drugs, how long does it take for their brain to become normal and begin functioning normal? I'll answer that. It's longer than 22 years. I can promise you that much. No, I'm sorry. Anybody want to answer that one? Just any kind of how it affects their brain, exactly those kind of things.
Again, I'm opinionated. I don't want to monopolize this.
No, you're
but,
fine. Opinions are good.
Yeah, it depends on the drug and the substance you're using, but people that have had chronic addictions, they're always going to have some kind of issue that's happened to their brain. And like I said, it depends on the drug. Methamphetamine does direct toxic damage. Marijuana may be safer on the brain. But I think the answer to that question is there's always going to be some damage, and there's going to be some permanent damage there.
And to expand it, it's not always damage to the brain either. There's other damage that it does to your body and the other things that it does. Can you expand on some of the other damages it might cause?
Sure. So alcohol can damage alcoholism can damage your liver, can damage your stomach, pancreas. There's all sorts of things that drugs can affect. So.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to say something, sir?
I'm certainly not a medical professional, but what they've told us in the training is that it retards development. So if you become addicted at the age of 14, you've kind of locked your brain into a 14-year-old. So I may not be seeing you in court till you're in your 20s, and we can't think, why are you acting so immature and silly?
Yeah.
Well, they've got the brain of a 14-year-old because they just locked in everything when they started their abusive habits.
Very good idea, yeah. Those consequences that they normally would get when they reach a little bit more maturity don't quite develop.
Correct.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
This next question is probably from a parent. It says, how do you teach parents the difference between enabling and helping your child? What's the difference there? Any advice for parents out there? The difference between enabling and help.
Well, I just go old school. I mean, I see 30, 40, 50-year-old people come into my courtroom on a regular basis that they got mommy and daddy with them. And they bonded them out of jail. They're paying their fine. I say, when can you get this fee paid? And the first thing they do is turn around and look at 70 or 80-year-old grandma. And I'm like, whoa, she doesn't owe me anything. You owe it to me. So, I mean, you can help them, but if it's a pattern for them, your enabling is just not making anything better. They haven't faced any consequences. You've paid the freight.
In a lot of cases, maybe making it worse.
Absolutely.
Anybody else want to touch on the subject? Okay.
One of the things that was mentioned earlier was the fact that, well, I'll back up and say this. One of the things that I see sometimes is that the behaviors of families will also change in line with the person who's using. So perhaps a family will engage in behaviors that suggest that they don't trust a person as much. So some of the behaviors can change, and I think what I see sometimes is that families don't realize that they are actually kind of supporting that behavior. Rather than allowing for people to experience consequences. Going back to what was said earlier is that there has to be a time where the individual is allowed to experience the consequences without being rescued. Especially when we're talking about adolescents, that is something that happens now, so they understand what could happen in the future, and the consequences could be much worse in adulthood.
Yeah, very good. We got a couple questions from our audience, and this one comes directly from our audience here live. Stigmatism always follows drug addiction and the disease. How can we break the stigma of addiction? Anybody want to try to touch on that one?
That's actually something else that concerns me. A lot of times when people come in for assessments, I hear, well, I don't have a problem, and if you're saying that I need treatment, then that means that I'm an addict. I think that word addict carries a lot of stigma. When we're talking about this adolescent age group, I feel that we can work more from a preventative model where we're working to break patterns of behavior that can lead to addiction, especially in adulthood. So, the stigma is something that concerns me. I'm hoping that we can continue having these conversations in schools and with families to help reduce that stigma.
Very good.
I think that also doing what Stephanie did by starting her blog, My Addiction to Addiction, just being truthful. This is the first time that I have ever spoken outside of recovery, opening up and saying, I'm an addict, I'm a recovering addict. And those things are important. Having people that are in recovery saying, I recovered from this and I'm not embarrassed anymore.
I want to follow up with this question because Stephanie kind of hit on this a little bit too. With the opiate epidemic in this country, how often do you see youth that start using pills from their own parents' cabinet? How often does that happen?
I would say the majority of our kids that come in with substances probably started using pills from their parents' cabinet. That's where they get their pills. And as Stephanie alluded to earlier, it's very, very important to lock up your medication because not only are they getting it, they're taking it to school, they're selling it, they're trading it, they're doing whatever. They go to these parties and Skittle parties or whatever other parties or rainbow parties, whatever it may be, sticking a bunch of pills in a bowl, taking a bunch of pills and chasing them with alcohol. Very, very dangerous. Kids don't understand that because they're worried about getting high, having a good time. So it's very, very important to lock up the pills.
Explain a little bit more on Skittle parties or rainbow parties. I understand what they are, but in case parents don't understand what that is, explain that a little bit more for me, please.
That's where a bunch of kids will get together and you bring this pill, you bring that, or they just get a plethora of medication, stick it in a bowl, and just start taking handfuls of it. They don't know what it is. They just know that there's pills there, alcohol. Typically they chase it with alcohol to intensify the effect. They could be allergic to it. It could take 15 minutes for a kid to die and overdose. The kids, like I said, they don't understand because they're not worried about that. They're worried about getting high and having a good time. So with the medication, it could affect them differently. Adverse reactions, you just don't know.
Thank you.
Has there been a rise in problems with opiate use, would you say, in the last few years? Obviously, it's a growing problem, but is it something that you've definitely seen over the last couple of years grow?
In Newton, McDonald County, I would say yes. I mean, it's, Alyssa, you can probably allude to the amount of people in your program that are substance abuse with opiates.
So I would say, to answer the question simply, yes, we are seeing an increase of opiate addiction in our area. It's certainly not at the ratio that we see in our larger cities, Kansas City and St. Louis, but there tends to be a trickle-down effect when it comes to just about any substance. So our larger cities see it, and then it tends to trickle down into our smaller towns. So I would say that for our adults, we're looking at about an 18% of those who come into our drug court in Newton and McDonald County with a opiate addiction. Our juveniles are lower at this point, but it's here. It's not, as you heard today, it's something that lots of families are dealing with. We're just not having those quote-unquote epidemic effects at this point, but it's around. And the good thing about drug dealers is they're very patient, so they wait for the demand to increase, and then they have what you need. So we have to be vigilant.
Very good. Great. We have another question from our audience. It says, what can be done by the legislature to help expand, improve drug and veteran